My special guest this week is Anne-Marie Chelso.
Chorizo. You got it.
Chereso. Damn it.
Well, it's a hard one.
I tried.
That's all that matters.
Swing and a miss. Anne-Marie Chereso. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
This is episode 314, Unraveling Old Patterns and Reconnecting to Self. So tell us a little bit about your relationship coaching and how you got here and what it is that you actually do, Anne-Marie.
Well, thanks for having me. What do I do? So I unravel people's patterns that get in the way of them living their most exquisite lives. And yeah, I'm a conscious relationship coach. So I help people become aware of the dysfunctional patterns that create conflict and drama in their lives. And I help them bring more self awareness and self empowerment into their relationships. I got here because I was super disempowered, super unconscious, and super self unaware. So I had to go on the journey myself through my own divorce and my own co parenting journey. And the more I started to wake up and learn, the more I was like, everyone needs to know this stuff. How
Mhm.
are we not being taught this? So I feel real
Right.
excited.
Well, isn't it crazy? I mean, almost everybody that I have that are coaches or working in this arena have come through the portal.
Yep.
And that is an awakening. And when you do start to see the patterning, you start to see your complicity in it, you start to wake up in the abyss, if you will, you want to help.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy journey. And I think, from my experience, people come in and they want to just make a change, and it doesn't happen overnight. And to your point, the direction that you do in your coaching, this is about self awareness, right?
Yep. It's about deep, deep self awareness, self acceptance. It's about courage. It's about awakening, all the things that you said. But it starts the portal, the doorway, the entry point is self awareness. And
Mhm.
I think that's where I started on this journey myself when I started waking up to all the ways I was co creating that conflict in my life, that contraction, that resistance, um, and how tricky my ego was at making it seem like it was everyone else doing all the things.
Yeah, ego is a tricky thing, isn't it? So when when waking up in this, you talk about self awareness, and what I'm going to stretch you here a little bit, maybe. What does that mean to you? How do you approach that notion of being self aware?
What I mean when I talk about self awareness is really like looking closely at oneself and seeing how our unconscious, unhealed parts are coming forward and kind of running amok
Hmm.
and running us ragged and interacting with others unconscious unhealed wounded parts, and then when they they collide, they create a bit of friction and
Hmm.
messiness. And so when we can bring a level of awareness, look at oneself, like if conflicts arising or there's a drama occurring in your life with some other human being, if you can stop for a moment looking at the other and just looking in the mirror and looking, what is it you're bringing to the table, and really getting radically honest with yourself about that, we start to look at those parts with loving compassion, with kindness, with generosity of spirit, that we can really start, taking responsibility for what we're bringing into all our relationships. And then once, like, we're so afraid to do that because no one wants to look in the mirror and see anything unfriendly or something they don't like. But the beauty of that is when we look and we see clearly, we actually are empowered to change something. And that is when we really start to take full responsibility for our lives. So to me, self-awareness is this idea of like, I am going to radically look at what's happening and how I'm contributing, what parts I'm bringing, and what I can do to shift my side of the equation.
So when we first talked, before we agreed to do this podcast, you were using languaging that you're using now, and those are ones of internal family systems or parts.
Yep.
And I think, we've done a couple of podcasts on that. I had Dick Schwartz here one day, to do a podcast with me, and the notion that people I don't think get that's really an important piece is there are parts or parts lost in space and time that are kind of in the background running the show. When you approach that conversation with your clients and you're trying to get them to become aware of that, what's the portal that you utilize to help them with that?
It's a really good question. And I'm thinking back to my earlier self when I started exploring parts work.
Mm-hmm.
And the part of me who was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is all theoretical. This is like, it took a long time to really understand and embody what parts work is really all about, and how um, the way that I approach it. I'm thinking about a call. I just got off of a client call, and we're doing parts work. And what I realize about myself as a coach or as a guide or as a support system to helping parts come forward is how sacred the work is and how gentle we need to be with one another, around all these parts, because we're so fragmented. We're one of many. That when those parts start to come forward, there's going to be resistance. There's going to be a lot to navigate inside that. So my role is to really walk gently beside all the different parts that are showing up to the table until, the essence, I think you understand what I mean by the essence, the true
Mm-hmm.
self is really starting to see the whole circus, that's surrounding, oneself. So the way I help people in parts work is like, it's like dipping the toe in the water, like really gently, like, take a look at this, take a look at this. And a lot of people can relate to it because we often say things like, well, there's one part of me that wants to do this, and there's another part of me that wants to do that. And that's sort of the entry point. Like, there we go. That's it. You are
Yes.
split. You're divided.
Yeah, we're all a little schizophrenic, aren't we?
Yes, we totally are. 100%.
So, do you, when you're going through this, I mean, I want to bring a couple of things in here because I want our listeners to become really aware of this process, because it's something that they can really kind of begin to start on their own.
Yes.
And you talk about dipping your toe in there a little bit. When you said that, I think about pendulation. I think about somatics. I think about coming in and going out and finding that middle ground of being able to pendulate between discomfort and, being present and being okay, and finding that pendulation in there.
Yep.
But also in this process, I think, this coming back to self, um, is in multiples, and the center, that self with a big S, that parenting piece that's parenting all of these parts. If we get into that space, um, is looking at these separation through a time warp,
Uh-huh.
and that, um, there's a somatic experience to it in and of itself when we can connect with those pieces. And one of the things that I like to have my clients look at and work through, and I'm guessing you do something similar, is to how old do you feel in that spot? Where are you in time in that spot? Can you orient to that space and time and what's happening in that spot? And it
Yes.
really looks at that separation and gives orientation
Yes.
to now, here, and then there, and what really is needing to be processed in the moment.
Yes. I really like that. I often use the analogy for folks. A lot of people can relate to this because all of us have experienced babies in our worlds. And,
Mhm.
you know, babies, 6-month old, 1 year old, they're all sort of their purest selves, their essence. And when, and that's sort of who we're here to be, our purest self, our blissful selves. And to help clients understand this idea of separation, um, I help bring them back to their essence selves, that pure self. And then where did we break off? Where did we start believing we're bad? Where did we start believing we're wrong? Where did we start separating from the truth of who we are and protecting ourselves? So um, when you were talking, that's I was sort of imagining. I picture this picture. I think in visuals more than I think
Mhm.
in words. But I really see this like essence self and then these small parts breaking away to protect ourselves. And that's essentially what parts work is all about is
Mhm.
when did that small part believe it wasn't safe, it wasn't whole, it wasn't worthy, it wasn't okay? And what persona did it create to protect itself? And then what are all the layers that occurred since then, right? Because once we separate from the essence of who we truly are, we create this new persona that kind of carries us off into the world. And next thing you know, we're believing we're that
Mhm.
versus we're believing we are the truth of who we really are. And, the truth is, we are bliss, we are joy, we are love, we are um, the presence of light. And then we forget all day long, every day, and we keep separating and we keep collapsing and expanding and collapsing and expanding into the essence of who we truly are. And Brooke, the other thing you mentioned was pendulation and titration, and this idea that um, we're constantly expanding our nervous system to be more of our true selves. And that takes time. That takes trust. That takes space. So we need to be patient with ourselves as we're expanding in that and allow the nervous system to receive the truth, the expanded version of ourselves. Um, and sometimes that feels uncomfortable, as we're expanding. It's literally like growing pains. When you
Mhm.
were little and you told you had growing pains, this is what it's like. It's spiritual growing pains. And as we expand, we need to have the capacity to be with the discomfort of that expansion.
Yeah. So the patterning
Yes.
that we're trying to break so we can come back to self. This patterning is the parts, the parts protecting, the parts trying to control an environment that they're not equipped to control. And to light that up in someone um, takes some exploration. It takes some trusting in you. It takes some
Yes.
trusting in themselves and the ability to hang out in that discomfort of what the original cause for that protection was, because there was a reason for that protection, right?
Yes. Yes.
And those patternings dictate and actually create our relationships as we go through life. And if there's a distortion in that,
Hmm.
we're creating that distortion.
Yes.
We are oftentimes, and this is a hard one because I want our listeners to hear what I'm saying and not taking self blame in this, but taking responsibility and understanding this is that we can walk into a relationship and there's a blank page and everybody's coming into that relationship in that black with that blank page with parts working in the background,
Yes.
and those parts have perspectives, and they are putting those perspectives, projecting those onto the potential new partner, this new person coming in,
Yep.
and they're seeing patterns through those lenses.
Yep.
And my contention in that is that there may be something there that we're missing.
What do you mean missing?
Well, some behaviors or some stuff sitting in the background in an early relationship that we're not aware of, that
Yes.
if we saw them, we might bail right off the top.
Yes.
But also in that, with these patterns, with these protective behaviors coming in from these parts, we often create them
Yeah,
in
we
the other
do.
person.
Yes, we do.
And if we're aware of that creation, okay, I'm putting this projection in there. Is it really there, or is this me projecting this into there? We have an opportunity to expand the opportunities in those relationships,
Yep.
and the potential for healthy relationships is expanded exponentially in that.
Yes, I agree. What I'm hearing myself think as you speak is the lessons to me came through parenting.
Mhm.
So what I learned about what's possible in the presence of unconditional love versus what's possible in the presence of fear and threat.
Mhm.
So love versus ego, however you want to divide that up. When you're a parent and you love your kid unconditionally, which all of us do as parents, um, our children have exponential opportunity for making mistakes, growing, evolving, expanding into their highest selves. We allow them to make mistakes for the most part, um, because we love them so much that, and we see their potential. So if you take a small child, for instance, and they're learning to walk and they're stumbling around, we don't make that a problem because we understand that the stumble is part of the process of learning to walk. And when our kids are learning math, we understand that struggling with math, it's hard, but we hold the space of possibility. We know they're going to learn and they're going to get the lesson and they're going to go to the next grade. So much like our spiritual growth, um, if we could apply those same principles to all our relationships, when our partner is stumbling and they're stuck in their muck and their ego, and if we can expand our capacity to be in the discomfort of the friction that's occurring as a result of their unhealed part coming forward, and we can bring unconditional love to that part, non-judgmental love to that part, beautiful. Like that's such grace. The trouble is, I got my stuff and you got your stuff, and they come out to play together and they just create kind of messes together, and then we got to learn through the mess. But when I'm able to really take get become aware of the parts that are coming forward, when, let's say, for instance, my husband's coming forward with one of his unhealed parts, and it kind of digs up some stuff, some grit. And if I want to go in there and join him in that party, we're going to end up creating
Mhm.
a mess. And that's fine because we get to learn from there and we'll grow. It's a little muckier. But when I am able to take myself out and I'm able to parent the part of me that would otherwise get engaged in the game with him.
Mhm.
If I could just extract myself and tend to that part, he gets to sort of be in his own little muck and mess over there. And this just happened to us this weekend. And he can do what he does with it, and I can do what I do with it. And often what's happening now in our relationship is I deal with my stuff, he deals with his stuff. We come back to one another and we go, oh, that was that abandoned part that came up, and that was that scared part that came up. And
Mhm.
so glad we got to learn and grow with each other side by side and not get entangled or enmeshed. And inside of that space of what I call love or acceptance of all these parts that we all
Mhm.
have, the healing happens so much more easily and gracefully and quickly than when we bring our judgment and criticism and resistance to the game.
So when we're coming in with our adult self
Yeah.
present, and we can look at what you just said, somebody's going through something and I don't need to join them in it. There's, if we're talking in parts conversation, there's an adult in the room, and that adult is allowing that other person's children to see that there's an adult in the room and that they can work through it and not get abandoned, because this is that attachment stuff that gets so in all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
I like to look through this through the lens of disengagement. It's been one of my fulcrums that I've worked with throughout my coaching career. And this notion of disengagement is exactly what you're talking about. I'm not going to step into that. I'm going to step back from it, and I'm going to watch it. I'm going to navigate it, but I'm not going to engage in it. And then if there's something that needs to happen later that's along the lines of repair or correction, we can come in and we can do that. But it's not in that moment of the chaos of the parts spinning.
Right. And that's, I just want to acknowledge that that takes incredible skill to
Mm-hmm.
be able to withdraw yourself from the other's spinning.
Mm-hmm.
I had a highly anxious third born child, and she was regularly dysregulated, and it dysregulated me. And the two of us were just off to the races pretty routinely. And, it took me a good 7 years to see how my unhealed part was hooking into her unhealed part, and the two of us were just creating giant messes along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was able to take responsibility for myself and step out of her spinning, and energetically I was able to create a safe space for my part to come forward, and then hers to feel safe to settle. And then my nervous system expanded. I could have more capacity for the dysregulated states. Her nervous system learned to start to have more capacity, and we were co-regulating together,
Mm-hmm.
which is really the beauty of being in relationship to one another, because we are sort of, in Ram Dass speak, we're all walking each other back home to our truest, most authentic selves. And it's in these moments that we have the opportunity to do that. This is what healing is all about.
Yeah.
So it's quite beautiful, but it's also so hard. And so for anyone listening, I just want to acknowledge that we're not taught to do this growing up in our families, in our homes. We're not taught to do this in school. We're not taught how to be human pretty
Mm-hmm.
much anywhere we go. And then when we get into therapy and we start looking at these things, we're told it's bad, we're told it's wrong, we're sort of affirmed that something should be different, which further deepens the separation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're listening and you're navigating these ways of being in relationship, um, I I would invite you to start exploring compassion and acceptance as the first portal or first entryway. because acceptance is the key to any kind of transformation. And that was,
Where,
I don't know about you, Brooke, but that was the hardest one. The hardest door for me to open was acceptance.
yeah. And it's an important portal. I use the trilogy of awareness, acceptance, and approval.
Yep.
And the awareness is there's something going on here, and the acceptance is yeah, this is here, and how do I navigate this piece? But the approval piece ultimately is that myself, my partner, the people out there that are affecting me are all on a journey, and um, they are who they are. I am who I am. I'm working my problems. I'm doing my thing, and they are or they're not. And to come into that compassion that you're talking about of the struggle that we're all in this human journey, and not take that stuff personally,
Yeah.
ain't easy.
No.
But once you hit that hurdle, uh, it's transformational. Things really
Yes.
start to change.
Yes.
Hmm.
And also having acceptance and compassion for self.
Mhm.
Like, oh, this is harder than I think, or oh, my daughter's tantrum, I actually can't handle it right now. I'm actually not in a place to deal right now. And what do I need to take care of myself such that I can become available? Like, I think if you're talking to parents on this podcast, we are so hard on ourselves as human beings because we expect ourselves to be perfect. We expect ourselves to always have the right answers. We expect ourselves to be infinitely
Mhm.
compassionate and have infinite space for our family members. And the truth is, we're just not. We're just human.
Right.
We're just doing the best we can. So if we can bring acceptance to ourselves and all the parts that are coming forward in any given moment, and then acknowledge what is. So it's
Mhm.
if like I have space right now, great, I can do this. Or if I don't have space, that's great too. That there's no judgment about what is in any given moment. They're just acceptance. And it's tricky. We accept with our head more than we accept with our heart.
Yeah, coming into heart and coming into that focus changes everything. Just as a orientation out of are you in your head or are you in your heart? And just that question can shift everything into a different perspective. You were talking a minute ago about co-regulation
Yep.
and co-dysregulation, if you
Yep.
will. And in this arena of parenting in high conflict situations, I think it's imperative that a parent understand that in its basics and learn how to really move into parenting from that perspective, because we've got children that are in a dysregulated system.
Yep.
And I've stated way too many times to my clients, you are the only hope for this to change. And in order to do that, you've got to find this place where you can regulate so your child can co regulate in an arena where they don't have the opportunity in another household.
Yes.
And that brings us back into the self awareness of what's happening and what the sensation feels like, and all of that somatic jargon that we've thrown around. And it's simple in its concept, but it is so excruciatingly hard to navigate because we're wired for survival.
Yes.
And that survival is not cognitive in most cases. It's out of the prefrontal cortex, it's back in the amygdala. And there's that anxiousness, that push to I have to do something here
Yes.
to protect. And I think that by and large, not all the time certainly, but by and large is an illusion that is parts sitting in the background going, we got to control this, we got to get ahead of this. And this is that anxiety ridden piece that we project onto our children so quickly that there's something wrong here when there's not.
Right.
So that notion of it's only sensation
Hmm.
is a conversation that I like to try to drive. And in that it's only sensation, how long can you sit in that until it downregulates?
Yes.
And that you can be and getting used to riding that wave, because kids don't know how to self-regulate. They're dependent on their parents for their regulation by and large up to a certain level.
Yes.
And I'm sure your clientele is much like mine in a lot of arenas where they're coming in front loaded with anxiety out the top of their heads.
Yeah.
How do we get them to understand this process and to come down into it's okay
Yeah.
when
But
they've got a
it's
lifetime that hasn't been okay?
yeah, it's a lifetime. We're swimming in a sea of uncertainty and
Mhm.
dysregulation. So our nervous systems are constantly triggered. I offer a really simple tool and a simple model to help people get radically honest with themselves to discern whether they're in a place of trust or a place of threat. Now, earlier we talked about the mind, the head, and the heart, right? The head can say, I'm
Mhm.
totally trusting she shouldn't be having this tantrum in the grocery store right now. I'm right about that. And that, if we're stuck up in our head, we aren't being honest with ourselves that on some level, we, or I'd like to say our ego, is experiencing a threat. So, this model that I use offers people an invitation to explore a question, which is, where am I? And inside the question, it will direct people to discerning, am I operating from a place of presence or trust, or am I operating from a place of threat or fear? And 99.9% of the time, we're operating from a place of fear. But given that we've been so conditioned and so programmed out of even recognizing when we're in fear, we
Mhm.
don't even know anymore when we're operating from fear. We just think we're right, that it shouldn't be this way, and there's a right way and a wrong way to be. So, um, when we can start to really get radically aware of the way our parts are trapped in fear and threat,
Mhm.
that's the portal. That's the way in which we can start to take responsibility for the energy we're bringing into the space, and acknowledging our own dysregulated states so that we can address it. Like that experience I said with my daughter, she was in a highly dysregulated space. I asked myself in that moment, where am I? I recognized I am in a place of threat. I am this 37-year-old adult with this 6-year-old crazy temper tantrum child, and I feel threatened. I don't know how to stop her. I don't know how to get her to calm down. I don't know what to do, and I want to control the shit out of this situation.
Mhm.
And I could, as a parent, I could be like, well, of course I should control her. She shouldn't be doing this. But when I'm really honest with myself, no, actually, her dysregulation makes perfect sense. She is just expressing on the outside what she's feeling on the inside.
Mhm.
And what she needs is a loving container to help her navigate the dysregulated emotions, the energies that are moving through her body. And I am either available for that or not available for that. And I got to be honest with myself about what's true in the moment.
Mhm.
When I learned to be available is when I learned first to ask myself that question: am I in a place of trust or fear? And be honest with myself. When anytime I'm controlling,
Mhm.
I'm definitely in a threatened state. But I didn't know that back then. So when I can acknowledge that for myself and go, oh, you're just scared, honey. You're just scared. This is a crazy situation. She's yelling and screaming. You want it to stop. You're embarrassed. You think people are judging you, all the things. If you could just go love up all those little parts that are trying to control all the perceptions and all the realities that you're imagining are happening, take a breath, calm your own nervous system down, then there's something new available in the
Mhm.
space. And then that's when you'll notice your kids or whatever adult you're dealing with or whatever human being you're in relationship to, they start to get curious about, like, well, that's nice over there, what's that like? I want to join you in that space. It looks
Mhm.
like it feels better than what I'm doing. So when we learn that, when we can use this question, get radically honest with ourselves, address ourselves first, and then calm our own selves down, we can invite others in. Or better yet, we can attract others. We're drawing people to us.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, Brooke?
It makes perfect sense. And what I hear you saying, I think, is one of the basic notions of orientation. Where am I? And where am I coming from? And that movement in and of itself can take us out of the amygdala, put us in the prefrontal cortex, and come present. Here I am.
Yes.
I'm scared shitless.
Yes.
Okay, what am I afraid of? Oh, somebody's judging me, or there's danger. And if there is danger,
Yes.
we're present to take care of it. But if we're not, to your point, 99.9% of the time, that isn't the case in the moment that we're in our anxiety, then we can adjust into, oh, I can settle. And your notion again of that's attractive to the child because there's somebody that's not meeting them in their panic. They're not meeting them in their scared.
Yes.
There's safety there, and I can move to the safety. And sometimes I think kids will act out with a parent that has that ability because they feel safe in the acting out and they can find their regulation in that. Does that sound right?
Yeah. And it's a remembering, Brooke. Like, the truth of who we are is we're peace, we're love, we're bliss, we're joy. That's the essence of who we are. So when we occupy that space,
Mm-hmm.
others remember who they really are and they join us. They join you over in that space. So it's like we're constantly reminding each other who we
Mm-hmm.
truly are and what the essence of our being is at the core. And if we can't get there, we're just going to be stuck in that sort of dysregulated place.
Yeah.
Um, there's something else you said I wanted to say. Oh, you said move from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
That from that, and then we drop into our heart.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important piece for us to add into the puzzle because it took me so long to let my heart join the party.
Mm-hmm.
I was up in my head for a long time. I used to teach mindfulness, and I spent lots of time teaching young people and old people and parents and teachers all about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. But I was forgetting all about the
Right.
heart. And the heart is where the transformation takes place.
Yeah.
And if I could, in that moment, my daughter having the tantrum, drop into my heart and go, oh, she's just scared. She has big feelings in her body and doesn't know what to do with them. And they're coming out all sideways. And that must feel really scary. And if I can really get in my heart around how uncomfortable that must be to be in that little body, or my 69-year-old husband also in his dysregulated parts and how uncomfortable that is in his body, or my 28-year-old son, like all of us in the discomfort of our own discomfort, if we can hold space for one another about how uncomfortable it is for us as human beings to be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
there's so much power in that.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that back in because the heart, I think, even, as we're talking, um, shifts everything.
Yep.
It's a presence that isn't that mental construct. It's not trying to figure something out. It's here. And, sitting in that relationship, sitting in the compassion, even in conflict with somebody that is making your life miserable, like a ex in a high conflict situation, being in that place of compassion for their struggle
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to meet them in it, but it allows you a better way to navigate it that isn't personal, that isn't taking it as an affront. It's just that, yeah, they're struggling and I've got to navigate this.
Yes. It's like we're just allowing each other to be human,
Mhm.
and it's messy, and we're not necessarily navigating it perfectly all the time. And I think this other piece about acceptance, I think, is so difficult for so many of us. Is accepting means allowing,
Mhm.
boundaries to be crossed, or abuse to happen, or things like that. That's not what we're talking about here.
No.
We're saying, I'm accepting, we'll keep you going back to my daughter's example since we're keep a consistent thread here. I'm accepting that she's throwing things across the room right now and it could hurt someone. And I'm also saying no, like there's a boundary here, you can't do that. But I'm not judging that she's some reckless, terrible, awful human being because she's throwing things across the room or doing whatever she's doing outside of her rage or discomfort. I'm like, oh, that's how it shows up in her. I, as a parent in this case, I have to show her more skillful ways to be with her dysregulated emotions. And I show her that by having boundaries, by having
Mhm.
loving boundaries, non judgmental boundaries. And I think boundaries is such a tricky subject for us because we don't know what boundaries are. Boundaries are about keeping people out. Well, it's really not about keeping people out. It's about showing people the right, and I don't mean right. I mean right versus wrong. Showing people the right way to be in relationship to me.
Mhm.
To what's it look like to be in integrity around being in relationship in the most sacred ways possible.
So you work primarily with women, right?
I do. I've been saying that for a long, long time, and it's true. But it's interesting. Right now, I think most of my clients are men, or
Mm.
a good part of my clients are men. So I think women. I start with women, and then their partners come in, and then we
Mhm.
find a lot of entangling happens there. There's a lot of patriarchal stuff happening in relationships. I think that we're all confronting these days, and men and women alike are suffering.
Yeah, and I think having perspective in those conversations are helpful for both sexes.
Yeah.
And for us to be able to take in the information that our clients are giving us from the opposite sex
Yes.
helps us really create a whole more holistic picture of the interaction because we are definitely wired so differently,
Mm-hmm.
both physically but societally, the
Yes.
whole patriarchal piece and what that means and how that is ingrained in our circuitry,
Yep.
and how as a society we're trying to navigate that and change those patterns so they're more relational, so they're not as rigid, so there is more back and forth and understanding without
Yes.
having conflict over it.
Yes.
So, as you've started to take in that process of working with men, how has that changed how you work, or has it?
Well, my when I went through my divorce, um, I was caught in a conditioned paradigm of good guy, bad guy, good cop, bad,
Mhm.
that whole thing. And I was not seeing the wholeness of um, everyone is being impacted, right? If we can go back to the patriarchal paradigm, how every man and every woman in our culture is being impacted by this conditioning in under the patriarchy. And the more awareness I got around, and I again, the gift came from motherhood, right? My firstborn is a son, and so now, the love you have for your child and your son is unconditional. So now when I start to see the impact on my son, who's now 26, 20, almost 27 years old, um, I have way more compassion for the older men, the more adult men in my life, and what they've had to navigate. And now when I'm working with the women I work with, I can see how we are all caught in a victim consciousness around, these male perpetrators in our life. I don't know if you're very familiar with Stephen Cartman's drama triangle.
Very much so.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with that. And so quickly I could see, while men have been labeled as the perpetrators and the villains, sort of in the story of many women, they're also victims. They also carry that victim consciousness in them inside this patriarchal paradigm. And so when you start to bring a whole or fuller perspective, you could start to see everyone sort of caught up in the system, and no one's escaping without some sort of struggle. And yes, I think our men have been corrupted, in hijacked in this patriarchy, but just as much. And the impact on women has been, unfortunate, but it's everyone's having impact. Everyone in the system is having an impact, and we need to treat everyone equally. And so I think that our men have gotten forgotten in that piece, in that puzzle piece, and they're just getting blamed. Um, and that's not of service.
Thank you for bringing that piece forward, because I think the balancing in this, and working with men in the other direction, and I work with both sexes and have from jump, but having that understanding of societal impact
Mm-hmm.
and how it brings forward belief systems. And if we're going to untangle these patterns
Uh-huh.
in order to come home to self, that we have to be able to look beyond just here, and how all of this imprinting has taken place with young women, with girls, with little girls from their inception through motherhood, and with little boys through their inception through fatherhood, and the wiring and the belief systems that are put on them,
Yep.
and how each one of those creates that victim component that takes us to blame
Yep.
and takes us away from relationship.
Yep. Yep. It takes us out of relationship and out of equity. Like, we're both equally responsible for whatever it is we're co-creating, and we're equally responsible for the way in which we are relating to the ways we've been corrupted, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And that is a whole nother conversation
It
to
is.
unpack.
Yeah.
But just to tip on that a little bit, how little girls are taught to be disempowered from a
Yes.
very from the word jump, that they are they sit back and they're not empowered to say what's on their mind, to engage with the things that they want to engage with. There's a whole controlling piece that they're supposed to look and be a certain way.
Yep.
And conversely, with little boys, to be shut off from themselves, not to experience their feelings, not to be relational, not to hug, not to be in that place of engagement, takes them away from the pattern. And you put these two pieces together and you look around and you go, no wonder everything's so screwed up.
Yeah, I mean, I think if in a nutshell, what you just described is the programming and the conditioning for young girls and women, and the programming and the conditioning for young boys and men is taking them away from their hearts. If we
Mm-hmm.
can bring it back. And I remember this distinct moment. My son was probably 10 years old or something. And I drove a carpool with a friend of mine, and she had three daughters and a son. I had two daughters and a son, and our boys were the same age. And the boys were 10 years old, and I was picking them up, and they were walking down the car line to my car, and they were holding hands. And it was so sweet, and it was so dear, because they're like boys. They had their
Mm-hmm.
baseball mitts and their bats in their backpack, and they're like holding their little hands walking down car line. And I called my friend, and I could feel all emotional. I'm like, they're holding hands, it's so sweet. And I'm like, I don't think they're going to do this next year. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to stop soon. And that innocence of that, like, heart-centered way of them connecting. And now I fast forward, my son's 26, almost 27. um, and I work with a lot of young men, actually, because I just happen, they fall into my laps, and how disconnected they feel from one another. If I work with young women, they have communities of friends, they have their girls, they have but young men and older men don't have those heart-centered communities to water those seeds inside themselves.
Yeah.
So all of that conditioning does so much damage to the heart, to the soul. And then we as women are like, what's wrong with our men? What, they're bad. They're so screwed up. But we're not acknowledging how painful it is for them to be disconnected, and how they've been corrupted. It's like they don't have a shot.
Yeah. And how they don't know how to connect.
They have not been taught. They've not
Right.
the conditions haven't been cultivated for that, for them to, whereas it has for us. So that we really need to shift that in our culture and create those communities. And men are sort of walking out on a limb trying to do it, trying to find those communities, but they're not. So what are they doing? They're drinking, they're drugging, they're cheating, they're spending, they're working, they're doing all the other things. And then we're throwing our arms up like, what is wrong with him? He's never home.
Where
Like,
the hell is he?
yeah, what's going on with him?
Yeah.
So it's just it's a mess.
But it's a mess that being conscious can help shift. And if we're going to find happiness, if we're going to find joy, if we're going to find relationship that we navigate for the rest of our life, or we find a different patterning in, it's not up to somebody else to shift. It's up to us to make those conscious moves toward, this is what's going on. This is my participation in it. And it's not about what they're doing. If there's dysfunction on the other side as being okay, back to your point, we're talking about boundary. No, not here, not now. I'm not down for that. But not getting into the judgment of what or why they're doing what they're doing. It's just not here. But being able to take that conversation personally and being able to look at our own protective behaviors that are keeping us out of healthy relationship
Yes.
moving forward. And I think that healthy relationship, as we start to break the old patterns, also speaks to our relationship with our children.
Yes. 100%.
And how much damage going forward we do to our children if we don't step into that new paradigm of being conscious, of being aware, and of parenting from this place within our heart, but teaching boundary and not enmeshment and
Yeah.
not control, but of mutuality and respect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. There's a lot of damage that's done. And um, I want to make sure that anyone listening is not like taking too much responsibility or too much blame,
Right.
because, like you and I said a few times already, this is a journey and this is not an easy journey. And to unlearn all the things you need to unlearn to get to a space where you can be that loving presence for others to feel safe in is a journey and requires support and time and compassion and all the things. And and then you got to like pay the bills and mow the
Mhm.
grass and buy the groceries and,
Right.
and do the laundry. So it's all of that. And be patient if you're listening and you're on this journey. Be patient with yourself, and damage can be undone. We're all on this journey. And if your intention is in right relationship to align with love, you will get there.
So I'm going to drop a little sarcasm in here.
Okay.
I'm going to just preload that.
Love that.
You did this all by yourself, right? You didn't have any help. You didn't have anybody guiding you. It was all self work, and you didn't reach out. You didn't have a coach. You didn't have a mentor. You weren't engaged with good teachers. You did this all by yourself, right?
I was just all alone by myself. Yeah. No, are you kidding? I mean, I still have so many guides, so many angels, so many teachers, so many people along the way I've been blessed to help me, and support me in evolving. Countless people.
Mhm.
So, and that's why I do what I do, because
Right,
I'm paying it forward. I love that
right.
I get to do what I do. So it's definitely, the biggest lesson I learned, Brooke, when I first started going through the difficulties in my marriage. I was 6 weeks pregnant with my third child. I didn't want anyone to know because I was super embarrassed. I was humiliated. I was scared. And then finally, I had to start telling people like 8 months into it. And that's when life broke open for me.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, like I got to see how much support was available to me when I started to get honest. So it takes a village.
Yep, and I brought that forward because it's one of those conversations that I want to keep beating the drum on, and that is that we can't do this by ourselves. Like you, I've had many really good teachers that have taken me to a certain spot, and then I've had to move to another teacher and learn the next piece and all of that.
Yep.
Um, but it's not coming off. This isn't coming out of listening to a podcast. This isn't coming out of reading a book. This isn't coming out of um, anything short of full commitment and engagement into the process of this is a journey. This is not a comfortable journey. There's stuff that's going to get rattled, but the discovery back to where we started of self, of
Yep.
coming home to here and being able to be in relationship um, is what we're all here to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Love that.
all right. Well, Anne Marie, thank you for coming and doing this. It's
Thank
been
you.
an awesome conversation. I hope we get another opportunity. I would very much like to engage in this conversation again.
Yeah. Me too.
Um, Let people know how that they can reach out to you, how they can get in touch with you, and find your
Well,
work.
thank you for having me. Thanks for the conversation. It feels like it was a minute long. So yeah, I could engage um, many, many more minutes with you, Brooke. People can find me at annemariechereso.me. I'm sure you'll put all that spelling in your show notes. It's a tricky
Hmm.
one. Or on Instagram at annemariechereso. Those are the good places to find me. And I'd be very excited to connect with anyone who's interested in exploring more.
All right. So, everyone, again, this has been episode 314,
Unbelievable.
Changing Patterns and Coming Home to Self. Thank you again, Anne Marie, for joining us. And everybody, keep listening and keep doing your work. We'll be here. Take care.
Thanks, Brooke.